Saturday night, the nation absorbed the news of yet another assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Some people are calling it the third such attempt because it's the third time a person with a firearm has been arrested or killed in the actual act. But if you include attempts that were thwarted in advance or attempts where Donald Trump wasn't actually where the would-be assassin thought he would be, well, the number's notably higher. But amid the incredible video footage that came out of the evening, from J.D. Vance being evacuated by the U.S. Secret Service a full 10 seconds before the president, to the gunman himself charging past security at a dead sprint, what appeared to be the entire cabinet in black tie gathered around the Resolute desk in the Oval Office. Out of all of that video, the one that spoke the most to the reality of our time was the video of Erika Kirk being led out of the event by her own security detail while weeping, "I just want to go home." Now, I'm not going to play the video for you here. Anyone who wants to see it, and probably most anyone who doesn't want to see it, already has. It's been viewed tens of millions of times across social media in just the last 2 days. But what's most remarkable about the video isn't what it shows. It's what it reveals about the person who sees it. Like the 2015 viral controversy known as the dress, the photograph in which some people saw a blue dress with black lace, while others saw a white dress with gold lace. The Erika Kirk video divides people into two broad camps. Same image, same pixels, two completely different perceptions. It all depends on something inside the eye. Now, unlike Dressgate, what's implicated here isn't visual perception, it's moral perception. One camp sees a deeply wounded widow suffering from obvious and perfectly understandable PTSD, being re-traumatized by being present for an assassination attempt on the president only months after her own husband was publicly assassinated. The other camp is best represented by commentator Shannon Joy, who responded to the video with two words: not buying. Erika's reaction's fake, you see. It's performative. There's just no world in which a woman whose husband was shot and killed only 7 months ago could possibly react with tears and emotion after a gunman stormed an event she was attending. Of course, Shannon Joy isn't alone. Thousands of people said equally horrible things in response to the video. Some people see the dress clearly. It's blue and black, by the way. Some people don't. And some people don't care what color the dress is. What's happening in the response to that video is much bigger than one widow being unfairly maligned on the internet. The cruelty being directed at Erika Kirk isn't just online trolling. No, what we're watching is the natural and entirely foreseeable consequence of allowing the worst instincts of the female sex to become the dominant moral voice in our public square. This is the world feminism has wrought. The devouring mother, the witch, the negative feminine with all of its backbiting and slander, its gossip and innuendo. The archetype was explored by thinkers from Carl Jung to Jordan Peterson. These values now guide our online culture. The cruelty is predictable. It's traceable. It's the output of a 50-year cultural project that has elevated, organized, monetized, and amplified the negative feminine, all while systematically dismantling every social structure that previously held those negative instincts in check. It's mostly being driven by women, plus some men who've come to hate women. The two phenomena are deeply connected. But the central engine, the influencers, the audience, the pattern of attack, the entire ecosystem profiting from the pile-on is overwhelmingly female. It's female influencers training female audiences to direct female grievances at other women. For decades, the cultural left has waged a campaign against the male sex itself. The phrase toxic masculinity wasn't used to describe certain negative characteristics associated with men. No, it was used to describe the entire range of maleness itself. It redefined the male sex as a category of being that requires constant public chastening, perpetual self-suspicion, and ongoing supervision by people who don't like men, they don't understand men, and they have no particular interest in raising boys to be the kind of men a healthy civilization needs in order to function. See, men tend to be more aggressive, to take risks, to build hierarchies, and they concern themselves with dangers posed by out-group threats. You can blame it on that performance-enhancing drug every man is on, testosterone. It's easy to see where those instincts might lead if they're unconstrained by discipline and morality. Dominance by force, rape, murder, theft, tyranny. But when masculinity is constrained, when it's channeled by self-control and moral systems, well, then it becomes civilization-building virtue. Aggression becomes rightly ordered ambition and competition. Risk-taking becomes entrepreneurship and a willingness to go into new frontiers to build a better life. Hierarchies become governments who subdue wrongdoers and create safety, and that concern with out-group threats becomes defense of all the things that man has built. In short, positive masculinity. Now, women tend to be more relational, more attuned to social dynamics, more risk-averse, and more concerned with in-group harmony than out-group threats. Every woman is shaped by powerful biological systems, hormonal and neurological, that enhance bonding and empathy and sensitivity to status and reputation. It's also easy to see where those sorts of instincts might lead if unconstrained by discipline and morality. Gossip, manipulation, exclusion, reputational destruction, and a kind of soft tyranny exercised through social pressure rather than force. But when femininity is constrained, when it's channeled by self-control and moral systems, well, it becomes a civilization-sustaining virtue. Men build civilizations, women sustain and nurture them. That female relational awareness becomes the ability to build trust and strong families and communities. Sensitivity to social dynamics becomes moral discernment and the enforcement of healthy norms. Risk aversion becomes prudence and the preservation of all that has been built. And that concern with in-group harmony, well, that becomes the creation of cohesion and stability within the group. In short, positive femininity. Now, the failure modes of the female sex have been documented in human literature and theology for thousands of years. The Greeks gave us Medea, who murdered her own children to take revenge on the husband who left her. The Old Testament gave us Jezebel, who corrupted a king and used the machinery of royal power to murder a man for his vineyard. Shakespeare gave us Lady Macbeth, who pushed her husband into a regicide he didn't have the stomach for. This isn't comfortable to modern ears, I realize, but modern academic psychology has actually caught up, if only recently. Researchers like Erika Kirk developed the field study of what they call relational aggression, the cruelty conducted through gossip and exclusion, and reputational sabotage rather than fists. These behaviors are well documented in childhood and adolescent peer groups and have been observed in related forms in college, workplaces, and online settings. Early studies consistently found that girls, on average, engaged in more relational aggression than boys. In other words, there is such a thing as toxic femininity. In groups, women have a remarkable tendency to generate moral codes, and they police violations of those codes with remarkable ferocity. In 6th grade, the first girl who holds hands with her boyfriend gets called a slut. But by the 7th grade, all the girls hold hands with their boyfriends, and that's no longer the standard. But the first girl who kisses her boyfriend, well, she gets called a slut. By 8th grade, all the girls kiss their boyfriends, and the bar moves yet again. The first girl to go to first base, she's the slut, and on and on. The bar keeps moving year after year with the same dynamic. The standard is whatever the second most aggressive girl in the room has not yet done. The first one to cross the line, well, she's in for it. The codes, when unmoored, are mostly arbitrary in the sense that they shift decade after decade, culture to culture. But what doesn't shift is that policing function. In a healthy society, men check the worst excesses of the female policing function, just like women check some of the worst excesses of men. But where women tend to be the most cruel in their in-group enforcements is against other women. Women subject each other to terrible and unfair judgments, and that's what's currently being applied to Erika Kirk. She's violated a code. The code is arbitrary. As far as I can reconstruct it from the campaign I've witnessed, it goes something like this. A widow whose husband was murdered should grieve in a particular, visible way. Not too composed or she's cold. Not too uncomposed or she's performing. She shouldn't appear at public events too soon or she doesn't really love her husband, but she shouldn't stay home for too long either or she's hiding from something. She shouldn't speak in public or she's using his death for her own aggrandizement, but she certainly shouldn't stay silent. That would be concealing. See, the standard is whatever Erika Kirk is not currently doing. That's why the standard always convicts her, and the women applying the standard get to feel righteous in its application. This pattern is well documented, but our culture has done nothing about it. The same 15 years that produced the toxic masculinity campaign, the academic field, the HR modules, the Netflix documentaries, the Sunday op-eds, it's produced no comparable reckoning with its parallel in women. Men became a category that requires constant public chastisement. Women became a category beyond critique. All masculine virtue has been redefined as sin. All feminine sin has been redefined as virtue. The whole thing is flipped right on its head. That redefinition has consequences, and now we're living through them. The architects of this cultural project promised that liberating women from the older expectations would produce happier women, liberated women, women fully realized. But they were wrong. Across every major measure, women's self-reported happiness has been falling for 50 years. The most cited paper on the subject, The Paradox of Declining Female Happiness, published in 2009 by economists Betsy Stevenson and Justin Wolfers, found that women's happiness has declined both absolutely and relative to men across every major US and European data set going back to the 1970s. This despite the creation of SSRI drugs, which 20% of women currently take. That decline in women's happiness began at almost exactly the moment the Cultural Revolution achieved its core policy goals. Roe v. Wade in 1973, the collapse of fault-based divorce across the states from 1970 onward, Title IX in 1972, the mainstreaming of the birth control pill, the accelerating entry of women into professional workplaces, the simultaneous redefinition of motherhood from the central work of a woman's life to just one option among many, and increasingly a suspect one at that. Whatever the architects of these changes promised, the one thing they didn't produce, measurably, decade after decade, is happier women. Marriage rates among women under 40 are the lowest in recorded American history. About half of women under 40 are currently married, compared with roughly 70% of all U.S. adults being married in 1960. The U.S. fertility rate is at or near the lowest it has ever been. The current total fertility rate is about 1.62, well below the 2.1 required to sustain our population. And we've been below the replacement rate continuously since 2007. About 47% of childless American adults under the age of 50 now say they're unlikely to ever have children. That figure's been rising, and the rise is most pronounced among college-educated women in their 30s. In fact, American men are now far more likely than American women to say they want to be parents. According to Pew's 2023 survey, 57% of childless young men say they one day want to have children, while only 45% of childless young women say the same. That's a 12-point gap. And of course, when American women do marry, they leave at an alarming rate. Approximately 70% of American divorces are initiated by the wife. 70%. And contrary to what some assume, that figure is not driven by abuse. In survey after survey, abuse isn't even in the top tier of reasons given. In other words, most of these divorces initiated by women are not because their marriages are violent. Just disappointing. Women are biologically programmed to prioritize security over risk-taking. That's because women are physically weaker than men. It's also because during pregnancy, particularly late pregnancy, women are particularly vulnerable. And after delivering a child, her child is particularly vulnerable. Historically, that need for security, both physical safety and provision, inclined women toward marriage. But in our age of unparalleled peace and prosperity, women no longer instinctively look to men for physical safety or for provision. Divorce is one of the great evils of human history. Now, I know some of you watching this are divorced, and that some of those divorces, though fewer than most would like to admit, were actually the right call. Some of you suffered things in marriage that no human being should have to suffer. Real abuse, real abandonment, real betrayal. The Bible itself permits divorce in certain narrow circumstances, and God has compassion on all whom marriage has wounded. But the modern American institution of divorce, the casual, no-fault, I'm just not happy anymore kind of divorce that's consumed roughly half of all American marriages for the last several decades. That's not what the Bible is talking about. It's something novel, It's something no civilization in all of human history would have recognized as a tolerable practice. And the damage it's done is almost incalculable. Children of divorce are more likely to drop out of high school, more likely to suffer measurable depression and anxiety, more likely to do drugs, more likely to experience their own marital breakdown when they grow up. They're more likely to become teen parents, more likely to enter the criminal justice system. They're less likely to graduate from college and less likely to report being happy in adulthood. The harm is largest when the divorce occurs in childhood, but it never fully disappears. Children of divorce, on average, carry the breakdown of their parents' marriage for the rest of their lives. Christ said, "What God has joined together, let no man tear asunder." And he meant it. Now, men tear asunder what God has joined together in all kinds of ways, either actively or passively. Active separation is the affair, the abuse, the abandonment. Passive separation, well, that's everything else. It's the friend who tells the wife that her husband isn't meeting her needs. It's the therapist who frames a wife's marriage as a problem to be liberated from rather than a covenant to be honored. It's the 1,000 small permissions to exit given every day until the wife who never would have left in any other century concludes that leaving is a form of self-care. The culture we live in is a passive separation operation top to bottom, and it's dedicated to the proposition that any marriage worth keeping is a marriage that is currently making the wife feel constantly emotionally fulfilled. That is not a Christian view of marriage. It's not even a serious view of marriage. It's a consumer view of marriage, and it's no wonder that it doesn't work. We've spent 2 generations now teaching children that the most important promise their parents will ever make to them, "We are a family, we will stay a family," is provisional. It's conditional. It's conditional in large part on mom's sense of emotional fulfillment. The result is an entire culture of human beings raised with the deep knowledge that nothing is permanent and no one can be trusted. That is what 50 years of celebrating female autonomy at all costs has produced. The masculine and the feminine virtues designed to work together in harmony with each other have been ripped violently apart. As a result, the unmoored masculine and the unmoored feminine have morphed into twisted, mutated parodies of themselves. Instead of oneness, we got war, and in a war, one side has to win. In 2026, it's the twisted parody of feminine virtue that seems to have won. And of course, it isn't just the institution of marriage. For the first time in human history, women have become the dominant cohort in some of the most influential and important cultural institutions we have. K-12 education has been majority female for decades, with about 3/4 of American public school teachers being women. Higher education, in many fields, tipped majority female years ago, and women now earn the majority of bachelor's degrees, they earn the majority of master's degrees, and they earn the majority of doctoral degrees in the United States. Human resource departments are roughly 70% female. That was, of course, supposed to make those institutions more nurturing, more pluralistic, more humane. It didn't. It made them more punitive, more conformist, and dramatically less tolerant of dissent. The Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, FIRE, the country's leading free speech organization, has been tracking student attitudes on speech for years. Their most recent college free speech rankings, based on a survey of more than 55,000 students at over 250 colleges, are unambiguous on the gender split. Male students are consistently more supportive of controversial speakers. They're more willing to engage opposing views, and they're less supportive of speaker disinvitation in relevant scenarios than their female peers. But what's even more shocking than that is that FIRE's data shows male students are actually more tolerant of their political enemies than female students are of their own allies. The young women on American campuses today are, on average, less tolerant of disagreement, more inclined to want opposing viewpoints silenced, and more comfortable with the social punishment of dissent than the young men sitting next to them. And those young women now form a majority and will inherit many of the institutions built by men. We're inside an unprecedented social experiment. The results are coming in, and they're not what was promised. One of those results is that when a young widow cries in public after an assassination attempt, a particular cohort of other women on the internet rises up and rips her apart for it. And of course, another cohort of lost, effeminate men, conditioned from birth by the most toxic feminine impulses, join in. Dolores Umbridge is taking over the world. Now, before we can talk more about how this is all revealed in the Erika Kirk phenomenon, I suppose we have to address the elephant in the room. The question all the just asking question folks keep asking, or at least keep implying. Did Erika Kirk kill her husband? No, she didn't. And before anyone says, but the wife is always a suspect. Yeah, that's true, in a murder. But Charlie Kirk wasn't murdered. He was assassinated. He was assassinated publicly. A long-range rifle shot in broad daylight at a public event in front of thousands of witnesses and hundreds of cameras. That's not how a wife murders her husband. It's not how a girlfriend murders a boyfriend. It's not how a member of an intimate household commits a homicide. Spousal killings are usually committed at close range in private spaces with weapons close at hand. They're not committed by a sniper at standoff distance in front of thousands of witnesses with their phones up. By the way, that's also not how professional killers do the job. Hitmen, special operators, or foreign intelligence officers. Because here's the thing about professionals. Their entire method is structured around not getting caught. It's right there in the word itself, professional. The number one priority of a professional killer is operational anonymity. They don't want to shoot people in broad daylight at public events with hundreds of cameras pointed at the target. They want to get away to kill again professionally. Erika Kirk didn't kill her husband. She was widowed by his assassin. And now she's the target of unchecked toxic femininity at national scale. And layered over all the conspiracy theories is another decidedly female phenomenon, a thriving, multi-billion-dollar industry of women turning real-life tragedies into true crime podcasts. Women consume true crime content at enormously disproportionate rates compared to men, 2 to 1. They're the dominant audience for missing persons coverage, for cold case forensic shows, and for Did the Husband Do It documentaries too. The genre has reshaped how a generation of women relates to grief, to violence, and to other people's tragedies. Of course, plenty of people, intelligent people, enjoy true crime for the same reason people have always enjoyed a good mystery. But a meaningful subset of that audience has crossed over from consuming true crime as entertainment to producing true crime in their heads out of real life. They've absorbed the format. They've absorbed the language of it. Something doesn't add up. The body language is off. Watch closely. Here's what they don't want you to see. And now that subset is applying that format in real time to actual tragedies happening to actual people who never agreed to be a part of the podcast in their minds. The campaign currently being run against Erika Kirk uses all the same rhetorical machinery of the true crime podcast. The slow reveal, the something's off here hook, the methodical build of suspicion through unrelated details, the implication of cover-up, the tune-in next week tease. Like all conspiracy theories, it's premised on a kind of Gnosticism, the ancient heresy, the belief that the truth has been hidden from the masses by powerful interests, that you alone are clever enough to see it, and that the work of life is to acquire and circulate secret knowledge. The Gnostic impulse is enormously satisfying. It tells you that you're smarter than all the institutions, that you have the inside track, that the world has been waiting for someone just like you to finally see what was always there. It works equally well for men, who tend to express it in technical conspiracy frameworks, and for women, who tend to express it through intuitive recognition of what's off about a person, or what's off about a family, or what's off about a public figure. That's what powers the campaign against Erika Kirk. It's not really an investigation. It's a Gnostic ritual dressed up as a true crime documentary, performed by people who get to feel that they've been chosen to see what all the rest of us are either too sleepy or too compromised to notice. Which brings us to Candace Owens. Candace has spent years cultivating a brand as the woman who's willing to say what other women won't. Her self-presentation is anti-matriarchy, anti-feminist, anti-cultural rot. She even wrote a book called Make 'Em a Sandwich: Why Real Women Don't Need Fake Feminism. A core tenet of her public persona is that she's that rare conservative woman who refuses to participate in modern feminism's ritualized cruelty toward men or marriage or the family. She says, quote, "We are living under a matriarchy, not a patriarchy, and it's hellish. Quote, the matriarchy is hysterical and I want out. And quote, we are in a matriarchy and this is why they accuse me of being an internalized misogynist, because I'm able to think through and acknowledge the flaws of what happens in society when women get power." But what Candace says is much different than what she's actually doing in her public life. What she's actually doing is decidedly toxic femininity in all the worst, most disgusting ways. In the weeks immediately after Charlie was killed, Candace launched into a steady stream of conspiracy theories about the assassination itself. The shooter didn't act alone. The forensic details were inconsistent. Things weren't adding up. The bullet recovery, the round itself, the circumstances of the shooting, Candace went over all of it on her show and on her X posts, day after day, planting seeds in the soil her audience inhabits. But Candace is a highly skilled communicator. She knew exactly what she was doing. Her audience, already trained to read between her lines, heard exactly what she was implying. They began assembling a picture in which Erika Kirk was a suspect rather than a widow. Breadcrumb after breadcrumb, by the time Candace pivoted in late February to the explicit, named, multi-part docuseries called Bride of Charlie, well, she wasn't introducing her audience to a brand new accusation. No, she was finally saying out loud what she'd spent 5 months training them to suspect. She's accused Erika of lying about her own family background. She's accused Erika of being suspiciously composed in public after her husband's assassination, as if grief had a correct visible posture, and as if Candace is the arbiter of that posture. She's insinuated that Erika has knowingly participated in a cover-up of the actual circumstances of her husband's death. She's implied that TPUSA is complicit. She's gestured at occult connections, at MK Ultra-style intelligence operations, at Israeli involvement in Charlie's death. And if Erika Kirk's third-grade haircut doesn't prove she did it, well, we don't know, but we know, you know? Now, none of these claims are substantiated. Some of them aren't even direct accusations. They're just insinuations or asides or raised eyebrows or interesting how this name keeps coming up implications. Her audience, well trained at this point, fills all the rest in. The brand is anti-feminist. The product is pure toxic femininity to its core. The brand is real women honor men, family, and tradition. The product is one dominant, high-profile woman's public, sustained, monetized, toxically catty destruction of her so-called best friend's widow. That's what the negative feminine looks like when it's given a microphone, a financial incentive, and a cluster B personality disorder. What Candace is doing is evil. It's not edgy, it's not provocative or contrarian, it's evil. It's the deliberate, sustained, monetized infliction of harm on a grieving widow for views and money and personal vendetta. The Apostle Paul in 2 Timothy warned us about people like Candace, calling them, quote, the kind who worm their way into households and captivate gullible women who are weighed down with sins and led astray by various passions, always learning, but never coming to a knowledge of the truth. And even more pathetically, in our hyper-feminized age, she's captivating gullible men, too. Now, I don't know Erika Kirk personally. Maybe she's a terrible person. I don't know. Maybe she's a wonderful person. Maybe she was a great wife. Maybe she was her own brand of toxic femininity. Honestly, it's none of my business, and it's none of yours. Yes, she is a public figure, and yes, as the CEO of TPUSA, she deserves scrutiny. But here's the thing. The people currently attacking Erika are not, by and large, criticizing her in her capacity as CEO of TPUSA. They're criticizing her as a person. They're picking apart her facial expressions in old photographs, how much she cries or doesn't cry. They're speculating about her childhood and her family. They're dissecting how much her dresses cost or who she poses for photos at public events with. It's disgusting. It's immoral. It's unchristian, and it's wrong. If you're behaving this way as a woman, you are giving in to the worst impulses of your sex. And if you're behaving this way as a man, well, you aren't succumbing to toxic masculinity. You're being a bitch. The same cultural project that taught women to direct their disappointment at other women also did something to men. The whole architecture of a civilization, the marriage covenant, the inheritance structure, the rules of war, the shame attached to certain kinds of male behavior, it was all oriented around the protection of women. Because women, through the work of childbearing and child rearing, are the people through whom civilization continues to exist. Over the last 50 years, that project has been quietly replaced with a project of punishing men. And not the men who were doing harm, just men generally. Boys while they're still in school. We all absorb the cultural message that maleness itself is a problem to be managed. The result is a generation of young men who are pissed off. They're lonely and lost, and they don't understand why. They're not the cause of the cultural breakdown, they're one of its victims. But they will be the cause of further breakdown, because boys without proper male formation become men who behave badly. Which gives the people who hate men further evidence that their hatred is correct, and the cycle just perpetuates. Influencers like Andrew Tate, with their gambling and girls and Lambos content economy, have made a fortune selling resentment to confused boys. It's a bad and ugly reaction, but that's what it is, a reaction. Because the market for it only exists because the older institutions that used to form young boys into virtuous men, the church, the family, apprenticeship, local sports leagues with a coach who knew your father, they've all been hollowed out by negative femininity. A generation of boys has shown up to a culture that has nothing constructive to offer them, and the voices that have filled the void are, with very few exceptions, predatory men and performance artists who wear masculinity like a skin suit. Among the men who are reacting to Erika Kirk with such cruelty, there's a particular subset who just hate women in general, and pretty women in particular, and visibly faithful Christian women, well, they hate them most of all. That cruelty is its own pathology. It's related to but distinct from the female cruelty that drives the bulk of the campaign. It's the male failure mode that mirrors the female failure mode. But even these men, embarrassing as they are powerful. In the garden, God tells Eve, "Your desire will be for your husband, but he will rule over you." The kind of desire being described there isn't affection. It's the desire a leopard feels for its prey. The same voice that said, "Let there be light," and light was, also declared as a fact of the universe that women would want to devour men, but that men would rule over them anyway. And so our increasingly gynocratic civilization isn't a gynocracy after all. When unconstrained toxic femininity succeeds at eroding positive masculinity from its position of leadership in a society, it's not the women who end up ruling. It's bad men. Men who aren't afraid to turn their anger and rage into dominance and tyranny. Wicked men cannot be constrained by wicked women. Wicked men cannot be constrained by good women. Wicked men can only be constrained by good men. That's the fundamental reality on which civilization is constructed. A good man doesn't model his life after Andrew Tate or Dan Bilzerian. He doesn't want to burn down his own country or throw out his own history. He's the man in the suit folding chairs after a funeral. He's the man who stops to help you on the side of the road. He's the man you depend on without even realizing it, at least until he's gone. That kind of man is being formed somewhere in this country right now, but not online. He's being formed by other men, in person, over time, the same way good men have always been formed. He's the man, by the way, who tells the women in his life not to listen to liars like Candace Owens. The answer to all of this is not the trad movement. There's a lot in that movement and the aesthetic of it that's true and beautiful. The family is the fundamental unit of civilization. The home is where most of the real work of life gets done. And the modern flight from both has been a disaster. But the version of trad life currently being promulgated online is largely based on a fantasy of a past that never even existed. Most women in human history didn't spend their days baking sourdough in a fashionable apron in a 4-bedroom farmhouse with 5 clean children at their feet. Neither did the 1950s housewife churn her own butter. Women have always worked hard. The Proverbs 31 woman is, among other things, a businesswoman. The Christian pattern is older, it's messier, it's more demanding than the Instagram version would have you believe. Now, the trad movement is just a LARP, exactly like the manosphere is a LARP. At the extreme ends of both LARPs are voices, male and female, calling for women to lose the vote and go back to the kitchen. But don't trust those voices. Even they don't believe that crap. It's just rage bait. Even if we grant the premise that the policy preferences of the single female voter haven't been particularly good for family formation or for society at large, or if we grant that the two-income family has largely benefited governments and not the people, there's still no virtuous path to disenfranchising women. You can't strip broad rights from an entire category of human beings who've had those rights for a century without tyranny. And the tyrant who gives you what you want won't stop with what you want. The answer to a bad cultural project isn't a worse political one, and the future isn't in the past. No, the answer is the slow, persuasive recovery of the wisdom of the past, voluntarily integrated into a better, future-oriented framework. It's about coupling autonomy and suffrage with duty and responsibility. It's about building something new. Last Christmas, I sat at York Minster Abbey, one of the most beautiful church buildings in the world, listening to a choir sing carols by candlelight. I was struck by two things at once. People have been singing songs to Christ in this exact location, uninterrupted, for 1,400 years. And at the same time, women have only been a part of that music since the 1990s. Women voting, women working in corporate settings, women having platforms for public influence, these are all incredibly novel realities. In many ways, it's a brand new technology. And like all technologies, it's a mixed bag. And here's the thing about the mixed bag of technological change. Many times, the worst consequences are front-loaded, while the positive results take a long time to reveal themselves. I've said before, when the printing press allowed widespread promulgation of the Bible in the vernacular, one of the first things people did with their newfound access to the Word of God was use it as an excuse to kill each other. 30 years of sectarian war. Now, 500 years later, I think we all feel pretty bullish on the printing press. It's unlikely that the future will look like the past. We should hope it doesn't. But I know it won't look like the present either. If we have the wisdom and the humility, we can overcome the current struggles with ancient wisdom and new structures. We can remarry the sexes, both literally and figuratively, in ways that answer the current realities of our time of abundance with the eternal reality of our duties to one another and society. I don't know what it'll look like, but I do know what it doesn't look like. A young widow with 2 small children at home was caught on camera for 30 seconds in the immediate aftermath of a shooting at an event she was attending, and she cried. She said, "I want to go home." If you watched that video and your first instinct was sympathy, you saw the dress as it actually is. But if you watched that video and your first instinct was suspicion, you have given in to the influence of the worst kind of toxic femininity. The community of women that has organized itself around picking apart Erika Kirk is not your friend. It's not your sister. It's not your liberator. It's a holding pen for the worst instincts of women, organized and amplified for the benefit of grifters who profit from female grievance the same way other grifters profit from male grievance. Different demographic, same con. We live in a dark moment, but that doesn't mean we should retreat or lose hope. We should feel called to action, and we should act. We don't have to fear the future because in Christ we have the freedom and the power to build a different and better future, to cultivate our families, our culture, and our government just as God intended. We were made in God's image. We were made to create, to build, to have dominion over this world, but not without a fight. We need men and women to take up that fight today just as they have for centuries past, to build a better world. There's a mystery inherent in the relationship between the sexes. See, men can't change women through direct action. They can of course use force to coerce a particular behavior out of women, but they can't change women in any meaningful way. Neither can women change men through any direct action, not really. But when we apply our values to ourselves, when we look inward, when we surround ourselves with better examples of how we should be, when we engage in self-reflection and self-honesty that leads to self-control, when we practice virtue and develop discipline in that practice, well, we aren't the only ones who improve. The sexes, as different as they are, reflect one another. Good men provide the opportunity for good women to be good women. And good women provide the opportunity for good men to be good men. So whichever you are, male or female, be a good one. Don't give in to the pet sins of your sex, but channel those instincts into virtue. Your life will be better, your kids' lives will be better, and your country will be better. And leave the grieving widow the hell alone.